What's up, skeptics? Welcome to another episode of Reason to Doubt, your source for all things skeptical, going live today. I'm Jordan. With me is Jared. How's it going, Jared?
It is going. It feels good to be alive. Oh, you
Yep.
said live. This is
Li-
live?
Live, also alive.
Oh,
Feeling probably more alive than over the weekends. We were super busy. I was throwing my annual corn dog day, and Jared won. It's an eating contest, so he ate 10 corn dogs, 100 tater tots, and drank 10 beers.
yeah.
Totally
My
worth
stomach
it.
totally was worth it. My stomach was feeling it for the next couple of days, though.
So we figured we'd do a kind of chill episode and make fun of some creationists. So today we are going to be watching a video with our favorite apologist, Kyle Butt. Looks like an older video. Like the video itself was posted to YouTube like a few years ago, 2 years ago. But I think this is like young Kyle Butt. But his talking points haven't changed since then, so it doesn't really matter. Today's video is talking about the age of the Earth. So Kyle, of course, believes that the Earth is 6,000 years old. He is a young Earth creationist of the Christian persuasion. I haven't watched the video in detail. I just kind of skimmed through it. But I'm pretty sure we'll be hitting, radiometric dating. We'll probably be hitting maybe some genetics. I don't know. I know that belly buttons come up because they come up very early. So it should be a good time.
Before we get into it, when you were a young Earth creationist, did this guy ever cross your path as an apologist in any of your education or materials?
I don't recall ever watching a butt video. I know Ken Ham, I vaguely recall, and Kent Hovind, I'm pretty sure I saw some of his stuff. And I definitely went to Answers in Genesis and creation.com, like the big websites I definitely frequented. I don't remember this particular apologist though. I might have seen him. I don't know, but it doesn't stick in my head.
Right. Okay. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I'm sure the talking points are identical.
Yeah. Well, it's actually funny because like the science friends like Erica and Creation Myths and a bunch of them, a bigger part of their channel is responding to creationists. That's a much larger part of their shtick.
Yeah.
And there's been like creationism, I don't want to say it's dying, but it's kind of like they've got nothing new. Not that they've had anything new really, but they've done a better job in the past of repackaging the same stuff, and it just seems like they've just kind of given up and just gotten tired. Ken Ham is 100% in on the culture war stuff now. Since his debate with Bill Nye, he's basically decided, what, screw that. And it seems probably he's focusing on what he really cares about, which is, making sure that gay people don't kiss or something, I guess.
Because it's in Genesis. I always thought it was funny because you mentioned 6,000 years and this is a couple years old. You think with the Earth being so young, you'd be able to actually count the years. Wouldn't we be 6,008 years now? Next year be 6,009 years.
You'd think, but unfortunately, see, the Bible doesn't give us a direct, accurate time. They're kind of guessing, and I do know that Kyle talks about that in the video. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And we'll get started. We'll see what Adam's anatomy looked like. So I'm running this on, I think it's 1.5. Let me know in the chat if it's too fast. Just, for everyone's sanity. All right, here we go.
I remember as a child being in a class in school, it happened to be, and the teacher had asked a question. She said, "What do we have that Adam did not have?"
Does this mean that he went to a Christian school, or is he talking Sunday school?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, if you went to a secular school, they were not doing a good job of the separation of church and state. So
it's true. I don't know where he's from. If he's from Kentucky or Tennessee, I could believe it.
I remember several of us in that class trying to rack our brains and think, what do we have that Adam did not have? One of us said, well, we had an extra rib. And of course, that probably wasn't the case because we weren't born with, Adam wasn't created without the rib. He would have had, and we couldn't think, what do we have that Adam did not have? And then I remember very vividly thinking a belly button. Adam would not have had a belly button because he was not connected by an umbilical cord to a mother.
Well, hold on now. Why not though?
Yeah, I mean,
why wouldn't God why wouldn't God have made him with a belly button like everybody else? There's nothing stopping God from making him with a belly button, right? And every other human to the end of time is going to have a belly button.
It's kind of like that thing, do you get your kid circumcised? If you're circumcised, or if you're not circumcised, do you not circumcise your kid? God knows it, Adam. If he's got a belly button or doesn't have one, his kid's gonna definitely have one. So he wants him to look alike, you know?
Can you imagine though, like if you're Adam, uh, I, if you've ever had kids, you know that like it's a very gross process, right?
Mm.
And but we are, you know, we come from a line of creatures that have had children, so we're kind of forewarned. Poor Adam had no idea what was going to happen, right? Like like the baby coming, and then the afterbirth. Can you imagine how shocked Adam must have been? Yeah.
Yeah, the first time, or Eve for that matter, like her first birth ever, she had no idea. Assuming they're real people, of course, but
Yeah, obviously.
yeah, okay.
And that made a lot of sense to me then. Do you think Adam had a belly button? Well, I don't know. Who does know? Probably none of us will know. But a question arises from that question. When Adam was 2 seconds old, how old did Adam look? 25? 30? 35? But he was only 2 seconds old. He was placed in the Garden of Eden, and it was full of trees that could produce fruit almost immediately after they were created. If you had the opportunity to cut down a tree in the Garden of Eden, and you counted the rings of that tree, how many rings would that tree have?
So this is getting into the whole apparent age thing, which is an argument I definitely like at the end of my kind of creationist journey. It was what I was like retreated to because it's like it's completely unassailable, right? Because anything could just have the appearance of age. What's the last Thursdayism? There's an actual term.
Yeah, last Thursdayism.
There's like an actual term for it that I can't recall. It doesn't matter. Last Thursdayism, basically like if you're gonna say that everything is created, like it looks to be billions of years old, but it's actually 2 minutes old in this case, you know, at the moment of creation. Then what's to stop that from happening like now? Like we could have been created last Thursday with all the memories before then, you know. Yeah.
And this thing with Adam, like, you know, how did God decide what age to make Adam? Like Kyle Butt says here, like, you know, like he had to be old enough to walk, obviously, but you put him in his prime, like.
Yeah, DM, good point here that he says when God is creating starlight and transit Earth, you can't trust anything in the universe. Exactly. Like if God, basically, it paints the Christian God as a trickster because he's made it so that you couldn't, no matter what measurement you took, it would be impossible to determine the truth, right? So, and some creationists have balked at this, which is part of why they try very hard to cloak themselves in the trappings of science and avoid miracles. Something that I've often said and others have said is like, you have a deity who intervenes all the time, just use magic, right, to solve all these problems.
Right.
But they don't want to do it because then they run into the trickster problem, but then they can't call themselves scientists, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
100? 200, 300, who knows?
400, 500.
But that tree would most likely look much older than 2 seconds old or 3 days old. How old would that tree be? Oh, that tree would be 3 days old, but it would look much older. There is an idea called the idea of apparent age. And that suggests to us that when God created everything, he created things in a very mature state. Adam.
But like, he didn't have to, right? Like, even if he made it mature in the sense that like it could produce offspring and everything, and so there'd be some apparent age. He didn't have to make every single thing in the universe have a coherent age that like works together.
Right.
He could have like the Earth doesn't need to have layers that require varying conditions in order to be created. There doesn't need to be a coherent sort of expansion rate of the universe. None of these things have to exist, and in fact, if God was like actually trying to communicate to us with nature as they say we are, or he is rather, then one good way to do that would be make it so that all of these things don't agree or
Right.
point to 6,000 years, you know.
Yeah, like if you just look at the Earth, for example, the tectonic plates, like just make an Earth without tectonic plates and all the mountains where they are. Like, don't show us the evidence that they were moving for all this time, you know?
Or even if you have to, like for whatever reason, you can't have stable life without tectonic movement or whatever, you know. Maybe I've never made a planet, so I don't know, but like you could have like all kinds of disconformities and things that are like physically impossible through any kind of natural process, right? You could just, if you can just snap your fingers and make it happen, you could just make that happen.
Mhm.
And then that would be a clear indication that those natural processes isn't what made it, if you were honest, if you cared about communicating, I guess.
Was old enough to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, the fruit trees were old enough to bear fruit, the question arises then, how old is the Earth? You know, there are not
Four
many
and a
things
half
that the
billion years
creationists
old.
and the evolutionists agree on. In fact, there are very, very few. But one of the things upon which both the creationist and evolutionist agree is this. In order for evolution to have occurred, the Earth must be multiplied billions of years old.
Yep.
Yeah. So I might quibble on like the exact number of years, right? But like it definitely requires a lengthy period of time for evolution to work. Now, that is not quite the same as saying if they prove the earth was young, like therefore God, you know? That's not quite, they'd still have to demonstrate at least their version of creationism, if nothing else.
Right.
Right. But I'll concede that if Kyle Butt in the next 20 minutes of video time manages to convince me that the Earth is 6,000 years old, that would be a serious blow to my secular worldview. I'll say that.
Don't hold your breath.
I'm not too worried.
That's what everybody agrees on. Is it the case that the Earth is multiplied billions of years old? That's the time that you need for evolution to happen. Did you know that there are over 75 different ways to date the Earth? And over half of
Are
them
there?
give an age for the Earth in just a few thousand or maybe.
Cool. I'm sure he's about to tell us all 75 so we can check his claim and he's not just going to say it, right? Right? That's what he's about to do.
Yes.
He looks like a trustworthy guy. Look, he even tucked in his shirt, you know? We don't need to check. Source, trust me, bro.
Be just a few million years. Some of them give an age for the Earth in just a few hundred years. And we know those aren't accurate, but they are all based on assumptions that are used by evolutionists. You see, the evolutionist says, well,
The curse of Kyle Butt makes him talk out of his butt. Do you think that Kyle is one of the ones who believes what he's saying? I firmly believe that a large number of professional creationists don't actually believe what they say, or at least most of it. I think they know that a lot of what they say is nonsense.
Yeah. Some of them are definitely charlatans who are trying to take advantage of people.
Well, like
to sell their material. Or
Ken Hovind is a pure grifter. Like, I don't know if he believes it or not. I don't think he even really cares. Like, it's not about that. He cares about like building his, sex cult.
It's
in
an ego
Alabama.
trip.
But yeah.
But
like, and there are other creationists who I'm sure believe everything they're saying. Paleologos is one creationist. He's a cool dude, and I'm sure I think he's wrong, but I'm sure he is genuine in what he's saying. But someone like Snelling but I'm always wondering, like, is it just ignorance? But they've been told so many times why they're wrong.
Yeah. I've watched a lot of butt content and Kyle butt content as well. And
but don't worry, the butt jokes are gonna go all night.
But this is not highbrow. But watching all the content, I think Kyle is somebody who was raised in an extremely conservative family from a very early age, and he truly believes this, like, to his core. So getting him to change his mind would be very hard. But
we can look at the Earth and we can see that it's multiplied millions of years old. It just looks so old. It looks so old compared to what? Just 2 seconds after its creation. Millions of years old. We have all of, and it gives us plenty of time for evolution. I'm sorry, but you cannot. The evolutionists cannot prove the Earth is multiplied millions of years old. And I'm going to show you several reasons why.
Ooh, this should be good.
Oh, here we go. Good question. How old is this video? The video was uploaded to YouTube 2 years ago. But I am positive, like this is Kyle Butt from like 10 years ago, based on like how he looks when he does shows now. My guess is like 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, this definitely looks like 90s production level with the swipes and the different camera angles.
That is not necessarily indicative, because some young Earth creationist stuff like looks like you popped it right off of VHS the day after it's made.
Yeah.
But his it's not like his talking points haven't changed. Like, I'm positive we're not going to get anything that's dramatically different from his talking points now. So it's not like it's not dishonest to play an old video, because it's not like he's like come to a revelation and changed his mind.
And the video is out there for everybody to see continuously.
And it's also talking points that I hear from creationists all the time. Even if Kyle himself has changed his mind, and I don't think he has, but even if he had, these are still creationist talking points.
Does it surprise you that according to the evolutionary time frame, that the age of the Earth in the universe doubles about every 20 to 40 years? You see, when Charles Darwin came out with his idea in 1859 of evolution, people looked at the Earth and they said, oh, it must be maybe somewhere around 200 million years old. And they would suggest that they had dating methods that prove that. And from 1859 until now, we have increased that from 200 million years or so to 4.6 billion years.
Okay, so I haven't done the math to check his doubling number, but this is extremely disingenuous because like the curve went like this. Like it's not like 20 years ago we were saying that the Earth was 7 billion years old,
Right.
right? Like, and there's no reason to like that's not actually how it worked. It's that they started thinking the Earth was very young in the thousands of years, and then that age rapidly got pushed back as science was developing in the 19th and 20th centuries. Like, if you, some people don't realize in the 20th century, like, I don't remember exactly when, I think most, at least close to half of the 20th century, scientists didn't know that there were other galaxies. That's how far science has come in just the last century, right? So, you know, the Big Bang cosmology wasn't known at the turn of the 20th century. So of course, like the age has been pushed back a lot, but it didn't like get to 14 billion. And it's just like zooming past, accelerating, you know, because if it was doubling every year or every 20 years rather than anyway, you guys get it.
Yeah.
This is
well, this talking point though too is like science was wrong, therefore science is always wrong.
Or science has changed its mind, or you know, has changed its answer in the past, therefore it's not reliable. When like,
Right.
well, what would you rather it do? Would you rather it just like doggedly stick to a point in light of new evidence? The fact that it can change is part of why it's reliable.
Well, that's a good
and
point,
all
Jordan.
along the way, evolutionists have said, well, we've got a dating method that proves this number, and we've got a dating method that proves that number, and now we've got a dating method that proves 4.6 billion, supposedly. When it doubles to 9.2 billion, are we going to have dating methods that supposedly prove that the Earth is 9.2 billion years old? Oh, I'm sure there will be some. But what will that say about all the dating methods that they have suggested that prove the other dates? Well,
yeah. So that's not going to happen, first of all. So a misconception that creationists push forward all the time is that science, like, that they'll say science is wrong, it changes mind, and the picture they paint is that science is just like bouncing all over, like the new conclusions have no relation to the old ones,
right.
you know, so you never know what it could be, and that's just nonsense. That's not how it works. Science is the process of becoming progressively less wrong over time. You know, we first thought that the Earth was flat, then most of us moved past that and thought that the Earth was a sphere. And now we understand it's not perfectly spherical. It's like an oblate spheroid. So when they said it was a sphere, they were wrong, but they were less wrong than when they said it was flat. You know?
It's always moving towards improving and continually getting better.
David Oakland, didn't scientists think that the universe was eternal? Yeah, at one point that was the predominant view among scientists. There was a pushback in the early 20th century because I think that actually was part of the deal with Einstein's theory of relativity, included a cosmological constant as a way to like basically avoid inflation, and that didn't work. So there was definitely some struggle back and forth, and whether or not the universe is eternal is still an open question, depending on how you define universe. Because like if you define universe as like our local instance of space-time, our visible universe, then that's not eternal for sure. But like what happened before the Big Bang, was there before, is that even a sensible question? And if it is, was there something beyond that? Those are all open questions. So the cosmos, meaning everything there is to include our universe, could be eternal. It's not known. But yeah, so a good way to think of this science becoming less wrong over time, I think, is when Newtonian physics was superseded by relativistic physics, general relativity and stuff. So like Newton's laws, F equals ma, you know, the stuff you learned in high school probably is still good enough to go to the moon. Like it's pretty close, right? But it's wrong. We know it's wrong. But all of the predictions of Newtonian physics that were right, whatever came next, relativity in this case, has to make the same predictions because they were right, you know? Like that's how the data didn't like change one day, you know? So yeah, this is a
it would suggest that
dishonest
all of
talking
those
point.
were false dating methods. And that's what I think we can show in this particular lesson. Like I said, 75 different ways to date the Earth, many of them giving us a young age for the
Sure.
Earth.
Sure we
Let's
are.
just look at one of those ideas. Henry Morris from the Creation Research Institute, or the Institute for Creation Research, ICR, has suggested to us an idea known as population statistics. Population statistics are simply
Okay.
dealing with how long humans have been on the
I
Earth.
love this one.
Supposedly, humans in one shape, form, or fashion, according to the evolutionary time frame. We're going to be very conservative time frame. And we're going
Yeah.
to suppose that a generation, the time that a new generation appears, is about 42 years. And we're going to be very, very conservative and say there is a population growth rate of only 2.4. 2.
Now, I wonder why he picked these numbers and not some other number. I put in the chat if you can guess why these specific numbers and not some other set of numbers.
Let's just randomly pick a number out of a hat here. Let's
Yeah,
just let's go
randomly,
2.4
yeah,
children.
Yeah.
4 is a tiny growth rate. That's that each pair of people have 2.4 children. They would have to have 2 to keep the population the same. The 0.4 is a tiny increase. Do you know that if people had been on the Earth for just 1 million years, with a generation being 42 years and a growth rate of 2.4%, or 2.4 children, that now, even counting wars and famines and plagues and pestilences, there would be 1 times 10 to the 5,000 people in the universe, on the Earth rather. Do you know how many people that the entire universe could hold? The entire universe, at 20 billion light years estimation, could only hold 1 times 10 to the 100 people.
Now, I don't trust his math here, but whatever, it's immaterial. That's not how populations grow, my guy. Like there's an old adage in like analysis and statistics. If something like is growing exponentially, but it can't grow exponentially forever, it won't.
Yeah.
Like there's only so many calories to go around, right? And like if you have you ever seen those videos of like mice in granaries,
Mhm.
and like the huge population explosion. If you measured the population explosion from there, like when the first mouse gets in there to like when you had the video on YouTube of the stampede of mice, like you say, oh man, if this population growth continues, they'll be covering the earth in a week. Well, maybe, but like that's not gonna happen.
Their food supply is going to run out way
Yeah.
before that.
Exactly. Their food supply is going to run out, and that 2.4 per generation isn't going to keep happening, my guy. Like,
Yeah, that assumes a constant rate of growth throughout the entire thing, which is not how populations grow.
This is the chat's guess for why these numbers. Let's see if the chat has predicted
You
correctly.
packed a person in every single part of the universe. And yet, we are supposed to believe that humans have been here for 3 to 5 million years. Did you know if you...
It's actually interesting he uses 3 to 5 million because and he says this is how long humans have been around. Because Homo sapiens, which are the only ones that most creationists accept as humans, there's some debate about that.
Right.
But like we've only been around for like 100 to
100,000.
300,000 years, something like that. To get the millions, you have to accept a lot of other species that some creationists would not consider humans.
I think if you showed a picture of them, most creationists would say that's not a human. Like,
yeah. So interesting that he picked that number. But
put humans on this earth about 6,000 years ago, and you keep those same parameters with the generation at 42 years, with the 2.4 children growth rate, that you get a number of about 4.34 billion, very close to our 6 billion.
is it close? I mean, it's 50% off, but okay.
I guess you're talking billions, I guess.
I guess it's closer than 10 to the 500.
It's only 1.7 off. That's not that much.
It's the right order of magnitude, I guess. Yeah, this is exactly why he picked those numbers, because they gave him the answer he wanted for 6,000, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously this is motivated reasoning, and it's just nonsense. Like, it's just stupid. Now, Henry brings up the bubonic plague killing off a third of the world's population, which that sounds about right. I don't remember exactly how much it was, but it was a lot. He claimed that his number included wars and plagues and stuff, but I'm gonna go ahead and guess that he did zero math on all of this. He probably got it from his buddy, Dr. Ian Juby. Not a doctor.
Well, how is that? How is it that we can show humans have not been on this earth for multiplied millions of years, even for 3 or 4, even for 1 million, but only they have been here for just a few thousand? Let's look at something else. The evolutionist would suggest to us that when you look at the geological column, when you go to something like the Grand Canyon and you see all of those different layers, those layers were laid down over millions of years.
Not all of them.
Under an idea known as uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism is a big word that means simply
It's not that big.
the present is the key to the past. That things operate now as they have always operated. And the evolutionist looks at how some things are laying down layers, sees how it is sometimes a very slow process, and says if 1 inch of this soil is laid down over 10 years, then a foot of that soil must be laid down over, and you do the math. And some
No,
of these
you do
layers,
the
they would
math.
say, are
Yeah.
thousands of years
You're the
old.
one trying to make a point here, right?
Sometimes we find fossils.
So like, okay, so uniformitarianism is the idea that basically the present is the key to the past. But critically, nobody thinks that there are no catastrophes in Earth's history. Floods and volcanoes and all kinds of stuff do happen. So it's not saying that like there's never any changes. It's just that basically physics hasn't changed radically, in the past when we're not looking, But something like and he even said it there, not every layer of rock is deposited at the same rate. Some are deposited very quickly. Some take a long time.
It depends on what kind of rock it is, right?
Depends on the rock, So yeah.
Of like a fish or a plant or a well that will cut through several layers. These are called polystrate fossils. Poly meaning many, straight or strata meaning fossils that go through many layers. How in the world is a catfish going to stand on its tail for thousands or tens of thousands of years while these layers slowly build up around?
Well, it's not going to, you idiot. Like it's not how it would work. Like you're not going to find a petrified I have never actually seen the claim that there's catfish that go through different
It's usually
layers.
a tree, right?
Usually trees, right?
Yeah.
So we'll just talk about the tree thing. So like you're not going to find a tree, like a fully formed tree at all, first of all, but you're not going to find like a fully formed tree that goes through layers that
That would be
millions.
brilliant, like a tree with leaves on it still.
Yeah, it's just like boom, fossilized. Yeah. So if you look at polystrate fossils, the way, and that's not the term that like the real science community uses. If you search for polystrate fossils, you'll only get creationist stuff. But anyways, so they do go through multiple layers sometimes, but they tend to be layers that are deposited quickly from like local floods and things like that. And so what you'll see a lot of the time is here's our local geology student. Uniformitarianism holds that geology is mainly driven by slow gradualism. Actualism is the current paradigm and holds that physics remains the same. Thank you for the clarification. The tree will often be sheared off at the top because what happened is it got killed by it got buried or at least partially buried. And then another one came and like basically cut off the part that wasn't underground, but you're still like, so it's going through multiple layers, but because there's multiple deposits. So it's not like it stood open to the air for millions of years while it was buried. It got hit. Sometimes you can even see multiple areas of growth. So like you have its original root system and then there's like more growth where it was buried again because it started to like regenerate and then it got completely buried at the end. But yeah, this is complete nonsense because the point he's trying to make is if layers take millions of years to grow to come about and you see a fossil go through multiple, that means the fossil had to have been there for millions of years, but it's a false premise. So
how in the world is a huge whale going to stand on its tail for hundreds or thousands or millions of years while layers build up around it? Is that a plausible explanation?
Nope, that's why nobody thinks
Absolutely
that.
not. What happens to a whale when it stands on its tail for 1 year? It decays, it becomes almost unrecognizable.
I don't think any whale's ever stood on its tail for a year. Yeah. The thing about these kind of claims is they're just said with such confidence. And I can tell you when I was a creationist, the way you're kind of trained and conditioned to behave is they tell you this and you accept it, or at most, if you're not sure, you go to Answers in Genesis or ICR. Like I know even now I can think like these claims are so stupid. Like all you have to do is Google it and you can find the right answers. But when you've been trained your entire life that you can't trust those answers, that scientists are going to lie to you and the only reliable sources are in your bubble, then the thought just doesn't occur to you that you should go elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
It-
I know it's weird to think, to look back at myself from 20 years ago, but like it just I remember many times thinking, man, that just doesn't sound right. Just why do scientists believe that stupid thing? And just never taking the next step. You know?
Why do scientists believe this stupid thing? Well, let me not ask the scientist. Let me go to my echo chamber real quick and make sure.
Yeah, well, according to Answers in Genesis, it's because they're lying Satanists. How about that? You know? Yeah.
As a whale, it certainly would never stand on its tail for 10 or 20 or 30,000 years while it is buried slowly over multiplied years. That's not plausible.
Nope.
Let me give you another example of how we know these layers were not laid down over multiplied millions of years. In the early 1980s, Mount St. Helens exploded.
My
In that
favorite.
eruption, that volcanic eruption, a huge dam was formed. Several days and months after that, this dam broke and a huge mudslide proceeded to slide down the side of the mountain, a monumental, catastrophic mudslide. In a single day, a cavern was carved out, a canyon was carved that was almost exactly 1/40th to scale of the Grand Canyon.
Okay, so in size, I don't know, is 1/40th claim, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you look at the canyons that are carved from catastrophic like floods, they don't look like the Grand Canyon. Like this curve is probably the curviest part of this entire canyon, right? What happens when you've got floodwaters blasting through an area? They blast through. But if you look at the Grand Canyon, it's like winding back and forth all over the place. Sometimes like, taking a U-turn and stuff.
Yeah, and it's like
Yeah. So there's like water carved holes in both situations, but the that's where the similarities about end. And also they don't deposit layers of like differentiated.
yeah, you
rock.
don't see it's all the same stuff there, right?
Yeah, you might have gradations, as like grains are sorted by size and stuff as they're settling, perhaps, but you're not going to get layer of this kind of rock, layer of that. Like that just doesn't happen from these kind of events. And another thing is like he's pointing to deposition that happened quickly right here, which completely undermines the point he just made like seconds ago.
Well,
Good point here by one homeschooler. Another problem, sometimes when you go elsewhere and ask about it, this is as a young earth creationist, you're attacked and ridiculed. As a creationist for years longer than needed because atheists never answered my questions. Yeah, that's a common experience, and and they attacked that, and they never answered the questions. They just attacked her, and but then the creationists obviously are accepting because you got that in-group bias, and the answers sound plausible enough. And so, who are you going to go with? The people who are just throwing insults at you and not really explaining anything, or the people who are answering your questions? Turns out with bullshit, but you don't know.
that's a
So,
great
like,
point. Yep.
yeah, I try. I mean, obviously we have fun here too. Total tangent. I can't tell you how many comments we get in our videos saying you guys were laughing this whole time. I can't believe you don't take this subject seriously. Like,
Like, we do this for fun, first of all. Like,
so like, yeah, we're gonna poke fun, but like, there's a difference between someone like Kyle Butt who is at least willfully ignorant, if not a grifter, or someone like Ken Hovind, who's an awful person, also a grifter. Like that's a totally different thing than your run-of-the-mill young earth creationist just off the block,
Right.
know. So we should all try to do a good job of like trying to take their questions seriously and explain to them. Obviously, if the person's a jerk, you don't owe them anything, but there's this idea sometimes in skeptical communities that if they're conspiracy theorists or they're young earth creationists, like they're basically there's no hope, and that's just demonstrably not true.
Yeah. Exhibit A.
This guy.
In a single day. In fact, this canyon is known as the Little Grand Canyon. Well, how is
Like
it that in a
creationists,
single
probably.
day you can look at this canyon and see multiplied layers that allegedly could be laid down over millions of
No,
years?
you can't.
But they weren't.
No, you can't, though. That's just a lie. You can't. Like, that's not what it looks like. It does not look like the layers of the Grand. That's just a straight up lie. Aren't these pastors paid and even have house car pension? This is their job. Yeah, that's true. Was it Paul? I forget which letter. Is it Romans? Where's which one is it? Corinthians, when he's complaining about not getting paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can thank Paul for
That
that.
sounds
I can't remember which letter it is, but in one of them he makes a point about getting paid. It's actually a problem in religious communities, like someone who has spent their entire life building up a career to be a pastor. It's like a career path, and then you realize, oh man, don't believe this anymore. But like, what are you gonna do?
There's a nonprofit that does that. I forget the name of it, where they actually go out and it allows pastors who are like questioning or doubting or no longer believe, but like they're so ingrained in that situation, it gives them a community like anonymously to
the Clergy Project.
The Clergy Project, yeah, it's a great project.
Yeah, I mean, you almost were in that situation because you just finished seminary, or you hadn't quite finished seminary.
Yeah.
When you
so
realized.
Luckily, I didn't get too deep into the rabbit hole before I realized I need to get back out of here. But yeah, I was on that path of, and I imagine had I been in there a couple years, had a family, you started making money, you start building a community, like it'd be really hard to get out. So
yeah, tough.
They were laid down in a single catastrophe. Do you know of any catastrophe that could lay down layers like you see in the Grand Canyon?
No, because none did.
Flood. The flood where the Bible says that the fountains of the deep broke open, that would cause.
So Noah's flood also laid down the salt crystals in the Mediterranean that require like calm estuaries in order to form. It also did those. Like,
well, see, this catastrophic flood actually had like calm spots. It was like they just,
right. That's true. Yeah, that Ken Hovind has said that when I debated him back when I still did that. Yeah. Like, oh well, it wasn't like a catastrophe all over the place. What are you talking about? It's a worldwide flood. That's like their whole thing, is that it was a catastrophe, man. And also, like at the same time, the heat problem. I think we're going to get into the heat problem later, so I won't talk that. But pin in there.
Cataclysmic geological formation and reformation, several times larger than the eruption of Mount St. Helens. A very plausible answer to many of the layers that we see. Well, the evolutionist says, well, we can prove that
if Kyle Butt says it, you should definitely look it up. Like that's that. We don't want to commit the genetic fallacy. It is just because Kyle Butt said it does not mean it is wrong. But playing the odds.
The geological column, the rocks are multiplied billions of years old. Well, how can you do that? Sometimes people think that evolutionists use a dating method known as carbon-14.
Oh, here we go.
To give the millions of years of time that they need. That is simply not true. Carbon-14 dating cannot be used to date anything but once living material.
Guys.
Well, did he just say something?
That was true.
He said that was true.
Unequivocally accurate. Good job, Kyle. We're only 13 minutes into this video. Good job. Gold star.
And even the inventor of carbon-14 dating, W.F. Libby, said that it can only be used to date things in thousands of years.
Also
and in
true.
fact, we have discovered that it doesn't really even work all that well for thousands of years.
Oh, there we go.
Sometimes
There you go.
carbon-14 dating freshly killed seals that give dates of over 1,000 years, or a living mollusk that would give dates over 1,000 or 1,500 years.
So that is technically true what he just said. He's talking about some freshwater creatures who you can like pull a mollusk out or snails or whatever and date them, and they'll give you a date much older, and it's not that old, right? And he's saying like, look, you can't rely on carbon-14 dating. But if you he's obviously not giving any citations, but sometimes creationists will give citations. If you look at the papers, they are peer-reviewed papers and the papers are saying, hey, everybody who uses carbon-14 dating, be aware of this thing, right? Like, so what's happening is the reservoir effect. And basically the assumption of carbon-14 dating is that you'll be getting your carbon-14 from the air, right? You're getting atmospheric carbon-14. Well, the underwater creatures aren't getting their carbon-14 from the air, and so they're not going to have necessarily the same level of carbon-14 in them as a tree would, for instance. And so it's just something you have to be aware of. Every kind of tool has limitations. This is one of the limitations of that tool. So if you need to test something that is subject to the reservoir effect, you don't use carbon-14 because it's not going to be reliable. So it's not like this is a bad method. It's a bad method if you're using it for this thing.
Right. And I bet those papers have hey, here's an anomaly. This is why we got this bad result.
Yeah, they completely explain exactly why and what to do about it, right?
Yeah.
It might be saltwater. I actually don't remember if it's fresh or saltwater. One of the two. It's the effect is called the reservoir effect, and it's for marine creatures. I don't remember the specifics.
Sometimes they would date different particles of the same musk ox that would date 7,000 years differently. Carbon-14 dating cannot be used
That's a
to
lie.
get any type of evolutionary millions of year time frame, and is often
That's true.
inaccurate even when dealing with a few thousand years.
I mean, it's inaccurate. We define inaccurate, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
pretty darn spot on if you're using it correctly.
And he
So
just
how is it
stated
that the
that
evolution-
carbon-14 is used for thousands of years, so
Right.
we wouldn't even use it to date
Right, exactly.
millions
So
of
it's
claim that they can get multiplied billions of years for Earth history. There is a new type of dating method that they would suggest to us prove this beyond the shadow of a doubt. Radiometric dating methods.
okay. First of all, this pet peeve: carbon-14 is a subset of radiometric dating. Just they're both radiometric dating methods. Anyway,
just using different radioisotopes.
exactly.
They would say, yes,
Did I get that
radiometric
right?
dating methods prove
Yeah.
that the Earth is billions of years old. Now, like we said earlier, ironically, there have always been dating methods that have been suggested that prove the alleged age of the Earth, which do nothing of the sort. But let's look at radiometric dating methods. They would say, yes, here's the process. Suppose you have a radioactive element like uranium. It breaks down into a daughter element like lead. The parent
Quibble: it doesn't break down directly to lead. There's a lot of intermediate steps between uranium and lead, but it does eventually go to lead. Lead is
Also,
the isotope.
he's obviously studied this enough to understand this much of it, which most people have no clue how radiometric dating works. So, starting to think maybe
The more knowledgeable he is, the less likely it is he's honest. It's like
right, yeah.
inverse, you know. You can be
Ye-
knowledgeable, honest. You can be informed, honest, or creationist. Pick two. You know. Uranium doesn't break directly to lead. There's intermediate steps, and so there's going to be some delay. But because the half-life of uranium is so much longer than any of its daughters, they'll be in what's called secular equilibrium, which means that while basically the accumulation rate of the daughters is the same as the decay rate of the uranium because it's so much faster, relatively speaking.
element being uranium, the daughter element being lead. Here's how that works. Suppose you have 50 ounces of uranium.
It's a lot of uranium.
That means the amount of time it's going to take half of that uranium to break down into lead is supposed to be 4.5 billion years or so. So you've got 50 ounces
For uranium-238. Uranium-235 decays faster.
of uranium, half-life at 4.5 billion years. So in 4.5 billion years, that 50 ounces of uranium is going to have broken down into 25 ounces of uranium and 25 ounces of lead, approximately. So if you find a rock that contains 25 ounces of uranium,
Approximately. It's okay. He said that. That energy comes from somewhere, you know, so you did lose some mass along the way, but I'll let him have it. It's pretty close.
and 25 ounces of lead, then you can calculate that rock is how old? Well, the evolutionists would suggest to us you can calculate that rock is 4.5 billion years old or so.
Yep, because that's
Give
how
or take some,
half-lives work.
technical stipulation. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is it's based on several assumptions that you simply cannot grant the evolutionists.
Oh, and if they make an assumption, then you just have to throw it all out, right? That's how assumptions work. If it's an assumption, then if you make basically in the Kyle Butt framework, if you make an assumption, you're just making it up. But there's no justification for this assumption at all, right?
It's kind of like making an assumption that, oh, I don't know, we assume a growth rate of 2.4 children. Like we just
Yeah.
assume that. Yeah.
Sure. That's how we do assumptions now.
Yeah.
We don't just make up assumptions. So whenever you're doing there's a phrase in statistics: all models are wise, some are useful. You know, no matter what you do, you're going to have to make simplifying assumptions, but you can justify those assumptions to limit your error. And that's all that's happening here. But we'll get into it. I know exactly where he's going.
Assumption number one, no daughter element was in the rock to start with. Oh, you see, what if there was some of that lead in the rock to start with? What if 22 or 23 ounces of lead was in that rock to start with? Would that skew your dates a little bit? Let's illustrate. Suppose you walk up.
We don't need to illustrate. So it's pretty obvious. Like there's an assumption in a lot of dating methods that it started with 0 daughter, and that's correct. However, critically, you can tell if that assumption is violated. There's a variety of different ways. So every radiometric dating method is well, it's different, and so the specifics will vary, and some techniques work for some methods, don't work for others. But for lead, for example, the uranium does decay down to lead eventually. Lead 207 and 208, I think, are the two isotopes of lead. But there is another isotope of lead that's common that's not radiogenic. So you have radiogenic lead, the stuff that used to be uranium, and then you have non-radiogenic lead, the stuff that was not uranium. The uranium decay chain does not lead to this kind of lead. There are different isotopes, just they're different kinds of lead. They're all lead, but some are slightly heavier than others. They have more neutrons. So if you detect that non-radiogenic lead in your sample, then you know that lead was there to begin with. And because all lead is going to be chemically identical, because it's usually the electrons that give you chemical properties, not your neutrons, not your nucleus, because all the chemical interactions are mediated well away from the nucleus, then anything that would bring in lead, that non-radiogenic kind, would bring in any other kind of lead that was around in trace amounts. So yes, it is an assumption that there's zero daughter often, but and I think there's other ways around that too. Mathematically, you can avoid that entirely, but I'm going to talk about that in a second because I think he's going to talk about some more stuff that are relevant. But there's other ways too.
To someone's pool, and you see that it's a 3,000 gallon pool.
Yeah,
The
we don't
3,000
need
gallon
that.
hours or so around. Oh no,
Blah,
we
blah,
haven't
blah.
been doing that. Last running our whole that there was no water in that pool to begin with, and that element started breaking down. Uranium started of it in the 4.5 billion year history that it's supposed to have had. That is a very serious assumption.
So that's another assumption, is that the thing has been a closed system. So like in the case of uranium lead, it's a zircon crystal, and you're measuring the age since the crystal closed, right? But it's not like scientists are just like hoping that the system was closed. Again, you can detect if the system wasn't closed. There's a few ways that this works, and the geologist friends of mine could say better and more specifics. But for instance, if you have a process that's taking things out, let's stick with uranium lead because he's talking about that. You've got, and it's a really good one because you have two different isotopes, two radioisotopes, uranium 235, uranium 238, decaying into two different isotopes of lead. So you've basically got two atomic clocks running at the same time, but they don't run at the same rate. Uranium 235 decays faster than uranium 238, significantly faster. And so, but remember, all of these elements are chemically identical to each other. And so if water or something gets in there or whatever, there's some kind of effect that weathers it out and leaches away some uranium or leaches away some lead. It's not going to affect both clocks the same way because they accumulate at different rates, but they will be taken away at roughly the same rate. And so they'll be off balance. So if it's been isolated the whole time, then both clocks will yield approximately the same age. They'll be concordant dates. If it has not been closed, then there'll be discordant dates. Now, scientists have fancy ways to get around even that, but that can tell you, hey, this wasn't closed this whole time. And it's not like this is a mystery. The radiation itself, as the uranium's decaying, is like damaging the crystal around it. So, like, this is a known problem that scientists can solve. I don't know if he's going to talk about isochrons, so I'm just going to mention it here. Another reason why this whole you have to assume daughter thing is nonsense is because you don't actually all the time. If you have your radioisotope decaying into a daughter that has a non-radiogenic isotope there as well. So there's a type of lead, but there's a type of lead that didn't come from uranium. If you have both of those things, then you can do some math that I will I did a proof in case anyone doesn't believe me. But basically you can do some math to eliminate the initial assumptions of parent and daughter. Basically, right now you've got some ratio of radiogenic daughter and some ratio of parent, right? Whatever the ratio is. There's 5 atoms of uranium and 10 atoms of the non-radiogenic stuff of lead, right? Some ratio. And you can measure that. In the past, there was a ratio. You don't know what it is, but it was some kind of ratio, right? So what you've got is two systems of equations, how things are now and how things were in the past, and you can do some algebra to solve those two systems of equations and put it all in terms of things you can measure today. Okay. And I'll put in the description my proof of this, or you can just Google it, the isochron dating method. You can mathematically eliminate every single thing. In fact, not only can you eliminate it, you actually get the initial composition out of this method. That's just like a bonus. You learn it. You don't. It doesn't really matter, but you do learn it, right? And so this objection may apply to some that don't have. You can't use isochron dating on everything, but for like uranium lead, or I think rubidium strontium, maybe, I think off the top of my head, a couple others, you can use isochron methods, and it's just that assumption is not present. So eat it.
So basically, we start with assumptions, but scientists have ways to mitigate and figure out if those assumptions are hold, or if not, and then they have ways to work around them to still get accurate readings.
Right. You have ways to check to see if your assumptions were violated. So it's not like it'll be a silently failed thing. You have ways to work around it if they were violated. And depending on the way it was violated, for instance, with the uranium, if it leached uranium away, well, that would lead to artificially young ages, right? Because there's less uranium to decay now. So it's even worse for his model. Yeah, I'm surprised it didn't come up with the Mount St. Helens things. They always talk about that.
Yeah.
They're talking about radiometric dating. Maybe you'll say it later.
Could some water have leaked into that rock and added some lead? Sure. Could some water have leaked into that rock?
Well, it's not quite so easy as that, because like zircons don't accept lead easily. That's why it's a good system. So like,
let me just pour some water on this thing.
Yeah, just throw some lead at it. It'll soak it right up. Sponge, Yeah.
And taken some lead or some uranium away. Sure. What has happened to a rock in 4.5 billion years? Who knows? We can't prove that there is a rock that old, but if there were a rock that...
Well, I mean, you can do some tests to see some stuff though. Like there's stepwise heating where they like heat it at incrementally increasing temperatures, and you can, so it'll release gases at different temperatures, which can tell you something about its history. I'm not a geologist. I don't understand all the implications. Like these are questions that have answers. Is my point. Just go ask a geologist. Don't ask Kyle Butt.
That old, all kinds of things would happen to that rock. You cannot grant the assumption that nothing has happened to that rock.
I believe the bow tie. Trust the bow tie. People in bow ties are more reliable than people who are not in bow ties. That's true. However, as I've said many, many times, I am not an expert in basically anything. I know a little bit more about radiation than your typical person as a nuclear engineer, but I'm also not a geologist. So like, go talk to a geologist if you want to know the actual details. Don't believe this guy. I'm just some random idiot on the internet.
Rock to take parent or daughter element in or out of it in 4.5 billion years. Assumption number 3. The rate of decay of uranium to lead has always been the same. Now, suppose that we look at that idea and we say, yeah, we assume that the rate's always been the same. What's going to happen if you make that type of assumption? Suppose you go out into the woods and you see a man chopping wood, and you see that he has chopped down 25 trees, and you see that it takes him an hour to chop down a single tree. And you say, sir, I see you've been chopping down a tree for a single hour. It took you 1 hour to chop down one tree. There are 25 trees on the ground. I am going to assume that you've been chopping 25 hours. He says,
well, Jordan, wait, what if you assumed that the rate of procreation was the same and that everybody had 2.4 kids?
Yeah.
What if you assume that?
Oh, the irony. Yeah. This guy is chastising us for making assumptions about half-life when he was like assuming the rate of baby making has never changed in the history of the earth, right? Okay. This is dumber than that, though. I'm going to give him a second to see if he says anything I need to address, but it's even dumber than that.
He says, earlier today, when my belly was full and my axe was sharp, I was chopping down 6 trees an hour. Just in this last hour have I only been chopping down 1 tree. Oh, well, so then our calculation is off by 20 hours or so because we had the faulty assumption that the rate has always been the same. If you allow the evolutionists to use those assumptions.
Okay. So, TD brings up, so what, like hydrothermal alteration metamorphosis, we can observe both of those and eliminate them from selection for samples to radiometrically date. Yeah, there are methods to get around these things. And all of these various dating methods that are different, dating different rocks, different isotopes, they agree more often than they don't. There's no reason they should agree, right? But on the changing rates. So this is a common creationist talking point. You don't know that the rates were always the same because you weren't there to observe it, right? So there's a lot of problems with this. First of all, they'll often point to situations like in the lab where like, look, the half-life has been changed for this atom, for this decay pathway, and therefore you can't trust that they have been the same. What they don't tell you is that not every decay pathway is identical. There are many different kinds of radioactive decay. There's gamma decay, where it releases a high energy photon. There's beta decay, where it releases an electron or a positron. There's alpha decay, where it releases a helium atom, a bare helium nucleus, and others. And they are governed by different forces, and they are not identical. So, for example, one of the ways that when they point to a decay rate that has changed in the lab, it's almost always beta decay, and it's often electron capture. And so what happens in electron capture decay? Basically, an electron falls into the nucleus. The one that's closest kind of gets sucked into the nucleus, and then one of the negative charge, so one of the protons becomes a neutron and gets ejected, I think. One of the nuclei gets thrown out. And so that's electron capture. Well, what do you need to capture electrons? Well, you need to have electrons, right? So if you strip the atom of electrons, well, you can't have electron capture anymore. So the half-life's infinite now. So but the reason that decay pathway is vulnerable to some environmental conditions is the same reason others aren't. So we have done a video about the change in decay rates. I think I did a video on the heat problem at some point in the past, and I probably talked about this at that point. But the atom, if you look at the nucleus, and the nucleus were like a nickel, the size of a nickel, the nearest electron is going to be outside the stadium in the parking lot somewhere, like a long way away. And that's just the first atom. For uranium, uranium has 92 protons, I think. Atomic number of uranium, 92. Yep. That means there's 92 electrons orbiting this nucleus. There is, from the point of view of the neutron, a lot of space between it and the entire rest of the world. So environmental conditions don't really affect what's going on in the nucleus because it's got all that buffer space, right? And so it's not like we've never checked decay rates. If we could change decay rates, that would have dramatic implications for all kinds of applications. But decay rates are extremely stable, regardless of the pressure, regardless of electrical currents, regardless of any kind of factor we can throw at it, with some exceptions. Electron capture is one of those exceptions. You can imagine if the atom is under a lot of pressure, you can imagine it might be easier for the electrons to fall in, for example, which is one way they've done it. But you can't say, oh, it happened for beta capture, therefore it'll happen for alpha decay. That's just not how it works. But let's throw that out. Let's say it did. Okay, let's just give it to them. What would happen? For it, what this gets us to accelerated nuclear decay, which is really fun because it's I like it because it shows that almost no matter what field of science you're in, you can use it to debunk young Earth creationism. And so young Earth creationists have a problem. They've got observed rates of decay and systems of isotopes that are clearly billions of years old, right? So one of the ways they solve this is saying, okay, what if the rate of decay is different in the past? And they usually shove it into the flood year because a lot of crazy stuff was happening there, right? So they try to, if they're going to use magic, they try to use all their magic all in one period, right? They say, okay, so God created the earth, things are going fine, and then catastrophic flood, the decay rates change, it sped up super fast. So all of that, so it got billions of years of decay, all crammed in that 1 year, boom, no problem. That's how we got here.
No problem. Except
zero problems. Except just one tiny little detail, it would vaporize the earth. Aside from that, no problem at all. Because when atoms decay, they release radiation, and radiation are particles. So like a photon gets kicked out, or electron or neutron, whatever. It also releases energy, heat. Every radioactive decay comes with it's transforming, it's trying to get more stable, and it usually leads to a reduction in mass. And so like that mass doesn't, first law of thermodynamics, energy, mass, neither created nor destroyed, Same thing here. So that mass, you can't just throw it away for free. If it's converted to energy, that's heat. Heat has to go somewhere. That's how nuclear reactors work, for example, or radioisotope generators like in a satellite. So whether you release 2 billion years of heat in 2 billion years or 2 billion years worth of heat in 1 year, that heat's got to go out. And you can do the math. I will put this in the description as well. I have done the math. If I change my screen real quick, I will share this this math at some point, or in the description if you want to check all the numbers. Basically, I go through the heat problem that SFT came up with, SFT being standing for truth, another grifter. And so what I did was I tied everything to the Oklo phenomena, which is super cool, but I won't talk about it right now, so it's not to derail the conversation. Basically, I looked at a specific event 2 billion years ago and said, okay, how much decay would we have since then? And if you do the math of how much energy would be released, it's enough to vaporize the crust several times over, right? Because just you can't release all that energy without it going somewhere. But it's even worse than that, because it's not just that you have radioactive isotopes in the Earth's crust. You are also radioactive. You have potassium-40 in your blood right now. The radiation is coming from inside the house. And so, like, they'll often say stuff like, oh, well, you have all that water to shield you from the radiation. Well, the water's going to be boiled away. So, like, but okay, whatever. Guess what? The water's also radioactive. And so is your bread and you. Like, the trace potassium in your blood would be enough to boil you alive. The amount of radiation that Noah would be getting, and that's just the heat. We haven't even talked about the radioactive, like, radiation doses that he'd be getting. Noah would be getting doses greater than taking a Hiroshima-sized atom bomb to the face every hour. That's how much radiation Noah and his family would be getting. They would be giga dead. All life on Earth, if it wasn't killed by the heat, would be killed by, being A-bombed every hour, 24/7, 365, right? Like, it's just completely absurd. So yeah, that's why accelerated nuclear decay won't work. You can't just change the decay rate and not, that has implications, right? You can't just like change this one little thing and then that's it.
You can, but
well, you can, I guess.
yeah.
You're not being at that point. Yeah. Okay. Bring old butt back.
Then if you use the same assumptions on other dating methods, like the decay of the Earth's magnetic field, or the ratio of helium and hydrogen in the atmosphere, if you get to use those same assumptions,
okay, so he breezes by this real quick. The decay of the Earth's magnetic field, it hasn't been decaying. This is another thing where they'll look at a rate of change right now and then project it infinitely into the past. So, that's just not how it works. The strength of the Earth's magnetic field fluctuates over time. And it even changes polarity over time. How do we know? Several ways, but one of the cool ways is that on the Earth's floor, the ocean floor, there's magnetic rock, basically rock that is subject to magnetic forces, is being spewed up in liquid form, right? And so as it's still liquid and cooling right at the interface, it is affected by the Earth's magnetic field, so it aligns to the direction of the magnetic field at the time. But once it's solid, it can't spin around anymore. Okay, so it gets out and say it's going this way. Okay, and so that's this rock. And then the Earth's magnetic field changes. Well, now the atoms are going this way. And then it changes again. Now they're going back this way. So you can look at the spreading of the Earth's floor at the mid-Atlantic rift. Yes, thank you, David. And you can see the magnetic field, how it's changed over time. Right there, you can observe it. Also, just the spreading itself is also a confirmation of how old the Earth is, because the rate we can see the rate of spreading for the mid-Atlantic ridge, and it perfectly matches traditional scientific predictions. So
you will see that you can get a very young Earth using those assumptions. They simply cannot be granted to the evolutionists because they are assumptions that are not proven. So how old is the Earth? Well, I'm here to tell you that I can tell you exactly how old the Earth is. Oh, would you like a number as to how old the Earth is? Oh,
Yeah, I would like a number, like
An
age
exact
would
number,
be-
like you
yeah,
just
that'd be
claimed.
great.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think I can give you an exact number, but I can tell you.
Bro, you just said you could. Bro, what do you am I going crazy? He just said he could give him us an exact number. He's like, well, I can't give you an exact number. Wait, what kind of ridiculous claim is that? That I could give you an exact number. What kind of idiot would say that? Let's ignore me from literally 10 seconds ago. Jesus.
That the Bible tells you how old the earth is. The Bible says in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the seas, and all that is in them. It's very self-explanatory. What does that leave out? The heavens, the earth, the seas, all that is in them. Does that leave anything out? No, it doesn't.
Well, I mean, if your last thing is and everything else, then no, I guess it wouldn't leave anything out. I mean, it does not make a lot of sense, just that story as it is, like plants existing before the sun, though I guess like they could probably live in a day of darkness. So I guess that's probably okay. But yeah.
In fact, that includes everything. Well, so we've got 6 days where the Lord made everything. You know what else the Bible says? The Bible also says that in Mark chapter 10, verse 6, in the beginning, God created them, male and female, talking about humans. So in the beginning, God created humans, male and female. The beginning of creation, when you look back in Genesis chapter 1, you see that God created humans on day 6. How old is the earth? Oh, that's easy.
Well, at least 6 days. So good. We're off to a great start.
It's exactly 5 days older than humans.
Oh, really?
You got it. You got the exact. Yep.
That okay. I guess yes. 5 days older than humans. Now tell us how old humans are.
Humans without belly buttons.
But I guess that's not really what you were wanting, was it? You were wanting more of a number. Well, I think I can give you a little bit more of a number. If you were to take the time that we have been on this earth and try to get back to the time that Jesus was on this earth, how many years would that be?
2000.
That's pretty simple. The year now is about 2007 AD. That's the year. It's actually January. Just turned that. About how long?
Oh, there we go. There's our answer. We were wondering when this video was recorded.
January
2007.
2007.
So this is math 16 years old, roughly. Yeah, cool. So decade wasn't too far off.
From us to Jesus, about 2,000 years. Secular history will give us that. We are in the year 2007 AD, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. That's pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy to understand.
Except it's not actually like doesn't tie to Jesus' birth exactly because the calendar was a little bit off, but that's just a couple of years. Yeah,
It's
whatever.
not. I mean, it's exact.
Well, how long was it from Jesus to Abraham? Secular history and everybody involved will tell you that that was about 2,000 years.
Whoa. Pump the brakes here. Secular history will tell you this?
Secular history and everybody involved. So we have we have the best consensus of all time right here.
Of everyone. 100% consensus. No, that is not the case. Secular history, I believe, doesn't think Abraham existed at all.
Correct.
So as like a actual person, you know. So yeah, I don't know where's that is the answer that young earth creationists will give you. But that's where they're just making up that number.
Everybody understands that. It's not a number that's even up for much debate at all. So
what?
We just debated it.
Yeah, it is actually. If you get outside of your echo chamber, if you're not talking to other young earth creationists, it's debated a lot, actually. Okay, whatever.
From us to Jesus, about 2,000 years. From Jesus to Abraham, about 2,000 years. So we just have one more piece of the puzzle.
How much do you think the other piece is going to be? Bets? Anybody? Bets?
2,000?
Oh, let's
How
see.
was it from Abraham to Adam? It's a good question. Did you know that in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11, the Bible gives us genealogies. Genealogies that tell us the age of the father when they had their son. And Adam was 130 years and he begot Seth.
These are the begats that literally no one has ever read. Like, this is the most boring part of the Bible.
I read them, but
You're a liar. I don't believe you. Nobody's read them.
I thought there was
and it goes
worthy stuff in
You know
them.
what you can do? You can take that 130.
Was there?
No, there wasn't. Yeah.
years that Adam lived before he had his son, and add it to the age that the son was before he had his next son, and that son was before he had his next son, and you can get a very good concept of how long it was from Abraham to Adam. Now, from Jesus to Abraham, there were about 55 generations, and those 55 generations composed about 2,000 years. From Abraham to Adam, there were only about 20 generations, and of those 20 generations,
Well, hold on. 2,000 years. 55 generations, those generations are 36 years old. Earlier, he said generations are 42 years old.
Yeah, but you
Right.
got to remember it's constant. So
No, that's a 15% difference,
I'm just joking. Yeah.
you know? And like successfully,
composed about 2,000 years. Well, you say, why
Savage Cobra predicted it. 2,000 years. Good job.
were there
Y2K.
55 generations between Jesus and Abraham, and those 55 composed 2,000 years, but there were only 20 generations between Abraham and Adam, and those 20 composed 2,000 years? Why such a big difference? Think about that just for a second. The ages of the patriarchs in Adam's time, Adam living to be over 900, Methuselah living to be 969, it makes perfect sense.
No, it doesn't. Does that make sense to anybody? It doesn't make sense to me.
No, it does not make sense at all. It makes perfect sense. The
Abbreviated
900,000-year-old
number of
man.
generations because of their long time spans. But someone will say, well, aren't there huge gaps in the genealogies? Well, did you know that the only reason we know of any gaps in the genealogies is because other texts fill those gaps in for us? So if we might have a gap in a genealogy, New Testament, we look in Jude 14. Jude 14 says,
all right,
now
he's just talking the genealogy.
Yeah.
I don't want to listen to all of it. So yeah, obviously this is ridiculous. Basically this argument is just like, if you already accept his very specific interpretation of the Bible, then but most Christians don't accept his interpretation of the Bible. And the Bible that they're talking about at this point, like the Bible wasn't just handed to Christians 2,000 years ago. These texts were religious texts of Jews before then, right? And there are young Earth creationist Jewish sects as well, but most Jews also don't necessarily just accept that these are exactly as was written, so. But worse than this, though, I think this really does a disservice to the text, forcing it to be rigidly literal. You miss out on some potential poetry and stuff that's there if you allow it to breathe,
There's not much poetry in the Begats, bro.
But not in the beginning. True, not everywhere, but like the Genesis story, for example. What's his the guy? Who's the guy? I'm blanking on his name. Biblical scholar who's his thing is he's like, all right, let's see it. What's his name? You know who I'm talking about. The one on TikTok. Help me out, chat. Somebody. God, what's his name? Damn it. McClellan. That's his name. So he was talking about the Genesis story in one of his videos. And he was talking about like why the flood happened, right? And so if you look at the cosmology of the Hebrews, the ancient Israelites, the firmament, what is outside the earth is water, right? There's water above and water below. And then there's like the dome that's like keeping the water out, and there's water. If you dug down below the earth, you get to more water, right? So it's all water every direction, right? And so God looked at the waters and he separated the water from the dry land. And that's how you got the earth, right? He basically took this chaotic water and separated the two. Yep. There you go. And so when he's disappointed with his creation, what does he do? I'm going to put it back the way it was. And so the water is returning back to its state prior to God's creation. That's why it's a flood and not something else. It's not because God had a hard on for drowning people. It's because that's returning to the state it was before, which I think is cool, like as neat mythological symbolism. And you completely lose all of that if you force it to be rigidly,
right,
literal. But I don't think he says
the
anything
seventh
else
Enoch,
worth.
and you count down how many he was for food, that there were no 3.5
I don't think he
million
said
years.
anything
You know how many-
worth anything at all.
That's completely fair.
And that the evolutionists need from the very beginning.
Okay, he doesn't say anything else. Anything that was worth talking about, we've already talked about. Yeah. Okay. So to sum up some of the major points, heat problem. If you accelerate radioactive decay to an extent where young Earth creationism works, you vaporize the Earth, and you also boil Noah alive, and you also cancer has cancer. Well, not even cancer. Like we're well past non-stochastic effects. Like this is like Chernobyl on steroids effects.
Yeah. It seems to me that a lot of these talking points, what they do is they grasp onto something that is intuitive, and they oversimplify it to the point where you don't need to think about it anymore, right? And then they just run with that oversimplification.
Definitely. Like, it's definitely valuing the plausible and easy answer over the right one.
Hmm.
But and we talked about this when we were talking about Professor Dave and his debate thing. Like, people will, if they can understand what you're saying, it's going to sound more persuasive, right? And so for a young earth creationist, well, I've got this answer that no one will explain to me that's very confusing and I don't get, or an answer that makes a lot of sense. Which one are you
Yeah.
going to go for?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I've heard you talk about radioisotopes and isochron, all that stuff, more times than I would actually care to hear you talk about it. But my eyes still glass over sometimes. I'm like, okay, yeah, I gotta get it now. Like I have a basic understanding, but I couldn't explain it to anybody. Like, so,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Nobody can be an expert in everything, but young earth creationism is always 10 miles wide and an inch deep. Uh, you are just in time to hear us summarize the entire video we just talked about, pragmatic crystals, so you can just avoid listening to Kyle Butt at all. Basically, Kyle Butt is stupid and dumb, and he's wrong. Is basically
we
what
just
this is.
saved you an hour,
There you go.
15 minutes.
Uh,
You should watch it
no,
anyway,
you should watch it anyway.
Yeah.
Good point here by one homeschooler. He did. Kyle Butt did get carbon 14 dating right for a brief, like 10-second window. Right. Like he was very briefly correct when he said that you use it to date living material or material that was once living, and only material in the thousands of years range, usually 50 to 100,000 ish. Definitely do watch the video. Also, if you wouldn't mind, if you like the video, hit the little like button. It really helps out. The only way the algorithm's going to know that you liked it is if you give an engagement. So like, comment if you liked this format and you want to see us do it more. Or if you have any suggestions for other apologists you'd like us to respond to. Coming up in the near future, I know that we're going to be talking to. We haven't scheduled it yet, so I don't know exactly when. But there's a couple atheists that are from Kenya that we're going to be talking to about their experiences out there. We've talked to one of them in the past, but he's got a friend now that the atheist community is growing a little bit.
He's
in Kenya.
proselytizing in Kenya, so
Yeah, so we want to help him reach a wider audience with that. We're also going to be talking more about mythicism in the near future. So plenty of stuff coming on. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell, and I'll do all the YouTube things. You know what to do. But anyway, that's the show. You got anything else?
Not today, huh?
All right, cool. Well, until next time, remember, you've always got reason to doubt.
Peace out.